hybridity, like what do you do if one of your ancestors is not quite human? And she did such a good job, and we have a recording of that one. So I was like, Summer, can you come back and do an intro, and then we're going to do a 4-part series. And then while I was planning this, Orion Foxwood text me and going, hey, I want to teach a workshop. And I was like, hey, how about ancestors? So he's going to do the River of Blood. You'll get more details on that one in September. And then we're going to do a whole version of this for the queer community. And there's a lot to say about that one. So, Summer, she has studied extensively with, what's his name, Daniel Four, and she has been involved with the Fairy Congress for years, so she's kind of steeped in this. So she's an ancestral healing practitioner, spirit worker, founder of Making Kin. So makingkin.com, she's got that in her tag there, is her website. Her work centers on helping people clarify their path and cultivate greater alignment in their lives through relationships with ancestors, place, and soul, allowing their gifts and intentions to take root more fully in the world. Summer, I am just very pleased that you're here and you're doing this, and I feel like we both got the call. Like, this is the year we need to work with ancestors. So, Summer, I'm going to hand it over to you. One note, if you have questions, feel free to put that in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat, and I'll bring the questions up at kind of timely intervals, and there will be a place at the end, correct me if I'm wrong, for questions and answers.
Yeah,
okay,
I'll have some pauses. I have a lot of information, so I'm going to go, but I'll have pauses for questions. So, yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jan. Yeah. And thank all of you for being here. I love the Fairy Congress community, and I love bringing the ancestral content to this community. So glad to be with all of you. I'm going to start with a little bit of a invocation, just to set sacred space for our time together. And I like to do that through song. This is a song that came to me from a Pacific yew tree. Thanks to Michael Dunning and Camilla Blossom, also beautiful Fairy Congress people in the network. And basically, this is what the yew tree told me was its invocation for the world tree. And you'll hear the word Kanieho, and that is its term for the world tree. And then you'll hear the phrase Tausalalausan, and it's basically like, do the changes to make things in integrity, to make things whole, to hold the world tree in a good way. So this is just kind of setting sacred space for our time together. So just allow yourself to receive, and we'll start there. I'm switching my sound so you can hear better. Om Haniyo, Om Haniyo, Om Haniyo, Kaniyo, Kaniyo. Tau Sura Hosan, Tau Sura Sayan, Tau Sura Hosan, Kaniyo, Kaniyo. With that invocation, we just call in that which brings integrity to the multi dimensions of this web of creation that we are part of. We thank the wise and well ancestors. We thank the beautiful beings of the lands, the sacred waters, the sacred winds and air, even sacred fire and ether. We thank the celestial powers. We thank those benevolent beings of the unseen realms. And we ask those who tend the integrity of this larger web of creation to join us and to help hold sacred space. We thank the guardians of the directions, the threshold keepers of north and south, east and west, above, below, within. And we ask all those who show up to please guard those thresholds and hold this time together in the sacredness of learning and growth and healing in a way that benefits all and ripples out into this beautiful web. Thank you to all who shows up in support of this. And so it is. Blessed be. So we are here to talk about ancestors during times of change. And in my experience, the ancestors can offer profoundly practical and human support during times of change. Conscious ancestral relationship can actually free our own personal uniqueness from inherited constraints. So if we tend the ancestral field as it becomes healthier, our beautiful soul gifts become more available. And our relationship to the earth can become more rooted and more profound. So those who are involved in all of this beautiful earth work, that work can become even more resourced with ancestral work. And I think part of this is because ancestors have a very grounded and practical insight into the complexities of being human, especially on an ever-changing planet. And I've really found through experience that they can help us become more resourced and adaptive, more responsive co-creators with the living world, especially the ones who are in beautiful connection with the living world themselves. And this relationship between human flourishing and ancestral healing and the more than human world is kind of the central interest of my personal work and my work with clients. And, today we'll be exploring the ancestors, not primarily as figures of the past, but as kind of a living field of relationship that continues to shape how we inhabit ourselves, how we express our gifts, and how we belong to the world around us. So that's, I'll be providing a lot of information today about an introduction to ancestral healing and practice and working with them. But we'll also have some time to do a drop-in kind of practice where you'll get to meet a wise and well ancestor and kind of experience the work, a little taste of the work today too. So buckle up for some information and then we'll get to some practice too. So I thought I would share a little bit more about my own path and kind of how it centers in this work. And I really started my path into healing through the body. I trained as a classical dancer. I practiced yoga for many years. And those disciplines really taught me that the body isn't simply an object, but it's intelligent, it's creative, it's a spiritual instrument. And from there, I started to study subtle and energetic healing, Reiki, biodynamic cranial sacral work, Shen therapy. And the last couple of years, Michael Dunning's been here and he does biodynamic cranial sacral work. And I just love his insights into embryology and incarnational mystery. If you ever have a chance to dive into his work, I highly recommend that. But my primary teacher is through, as Jan mentioned, Dr. Daniel Four. with ancestral medicine. And so I'm a trained ancestral healing, lineage healing practitioner. And then I did some further training with him in animist practice and earth ritual. So kind of bringing more of the ancestral knowledge and the personal knowledge of land connection into the work. I also studied with Betsy Bergstrom, who's rooted in Norse animism, and Sandra Ingerman, kind of more advanced shamanic studies. But I started my shamanic training actually with another Fairy Congress person, Diana Pepper of Tree Frog Farm, who taught me how to make shamanic flower essences. So that was kind of my initial sort of introduction to nature spirits. And I'm just offering this to kind of give a context of a lot of the learning that I've had. I also have a Taoist and Vajrayana Buddhism practice and have trained in Kabbalistic tarot and astrology and things like that. But beyond all of that training, it's really been about following soul impulses and my own healing journey. And I identify as being neurodivergent. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at one point, and have this lifelong interest in altered states of consciousness, spiritual sensitivity, embodiment, mental health, all of those kinds of things. And what all of this really roots me in is this dedication to discernment and how we remain rooted in the body in ordinary life while still relating to these subtle energies, these spiritual energies, things like that. And part of that has been my own discovery of my connection to the deep forces of yin and the void, my ancestors, and even my own sort of past life healing. So that really shapes this work, and the way that I support people and intending the ancestral, their embodied experience, their spiritual experience. And really, my own path has been figuring out how to allow my soul gifts to really emerge. And that's what I'm passionate about with other people. So I just offer that to say that, I have formal training, but it also comes from a lot of lived experience. And my intention isn't to get you to adopt any sort of spiritual worldview, but rather to create a safe and grounded space to explore what your personal relationship to your ancestors, to your own personal unfolding is, and with the larger intention of helping you support whatever changes you're navigating for your life. So with that all said, this workshop is both kind of a standalone introduction to ancestors and how do we approach that work, but it's also a doorway into a longer 4-part series that Jan mentioned. And so I'll talk a little bit about both of those things, and kind of why the 4-part series and what's the intention around working with ancestors in that particular way. So you don't need to know your genealogy to participate in ancestral work. You don't even have to have previous experience in spirit contact. You don't even have to, perceive or believe everything in the same way that I do. I'm offering structures of how I understand things, but I just honor that each one of you will have your own unique experience with this work. So everything I offer is invitational, and definitely, listen to your own internal guidance. My view of that invocation of the world tree is we have a collective integrity, but we also have internal integrity. And so blessings on that internal integrity for each one of you. So with that, each of you as a participant in this, does remain responsible for your own pacing and discernment and consent. And we'll talk more about ritual safety around that. But yeah, there's an invitation for you to be full participants in this work that we're diving into today. Yeah. So I'm going to start with a little bit of just an introduction to ancestors and what do we mean by ancestors? That's like the best place to start. And, I will say there are concepts of ancestors of blood versus ancestors of lineage or spirit. I'm primarily referring to ancestors of blood more because of the DNA and the blood and the bone connection to that. But that's not to say that the ancestors of spirit or lineage are any less important. Like those are extremely helpful guides to be connected to and to resource our own soul path and things like that. So, but in terms of the ancestors of more our physical incarnation, what I will say is that not all the dead are equally well. Death does not necessarily make someone wise. At least that's my experience. And I think that, an important foundation of how I approach this work is that we just don't indiscriminately contact the dead. We orient towards ancestors who are wise and well and supportive of the flourishing of ourselves and their descendants in general. So there's a couple of categories of ancestors that you might think of. There's the known ancestors, the ones that we have names for, we know about their lives, or we have stories about them. We also have the unknown ones that are much larger body of people. Maybe we'll have names of them, but really stories have been lost. And I kind of distinguish, both of those two categories from the really wise and well ancestors. They might be known to us, or they might be not known to us. And these are basically ancestors who have become sufficiently healed, they're resourced, they're connected to greater sources of goodness. They can safely support us as their descendants. And I sometimes think of it as like almost like they're connected to a larger pool of consciousness, that they're like one drop in the sea of that consciousness, and they're at peace with that relationship with the larger whole. And because of that sense that the wise and well ones are sort of connected with this larger field of consciousness, I sort of understand this larger field as an ancestral field, like a field of energy. And we inherit certain traits through biology, through epigenetic influence, through all the things that pass down to us through family and culture. But we can also connect with and inherit things from actual continued relationship with that field, with the dead, with the larger ancestral collective. We can receive things directly from them. So that's a bit of a just like, okay, who are the ancestors? I'll pause there and see if there's any like burning questions about any confusion related to that before I move on. No. Okay, great. So I was thinking about, a little bit more about why ancestors are powerful allies during change. And, I mentioned they're particularly knowledgeable about being human. They know what it's like to live in a body. Other spiritual beings may not have that knowledge. They may have really profound ecological, mythic transpersonal wisdom, but sometimes they don't know what it is to be human so much. And the benefit of the ancestors, they've experienced relationships, living in family, the complexity of that, the complexity of survival and livelihood, scarcity, um, the complexity of sexuality, parenting, what it means to be reproductive, um, all of the things related to like grief and illness, aging, dying, all those very human aspects of what it means to be impermanent in these bodies. Um, Also, things related to belonging and exclusion, what it means to be an insider or an outsider. Um, as well as a lot of them experience migration, displacement, um, and things that we see happening in our world today: cultural, religious transformation, war, poverty, environmental changes. Like the folks that lived through the ice ages have a lot of information about that. Just in general, like what it is to live in social upheaval. And some ancestors have actual practical skills. They have healing knowledge. They know crafts and rituals and survival strategies that might have been lost over time, and they can kind of reorient us and remind us of those things. But I will say, sometimes the wise and well ones who have healed, they can often offer wisdom, not just from what they did well, but also what they learned through failure. They're like, oh, we don't want to do that anymore. Like, that was a mistake that we learned from. So, not just thinking about like, oh, I'm going to go back and listen to all of the wonderful wisdom of what they did well. They may have just a lot to say about what they didn't do so well and learned from. Um, so, you know, from a more healed ancestral perspective, they understand both what sustained themselves, their people, and what also caused harm if they're really in a well place. And Jan, I don't know if you want to share this if you're available to, but Jan has a great story that he shared about like asking for some ancestral support during a particular period. Do you want to share that, Jan? Yeah.
I can. I haven't specifically trained in ancestor work like you have. You've done extensive work. I'm a shamanic practitioner, so people come in and for healing work, and there was this one woman. She came in. Actually, I've got a number of stories, and it's like when ancestors show up, they can be things can happen really quickly. So here is this woman. She was, what do you call it when you put shoes onto horses? That was her job. It was like really
It's called a
stretching.
farrier.
Right, yeah. And her arm was like completely messed up, and she was trying to do, get healing work around it. And she came in, and I immediately knew her ancestors. I could see the map in front of me, like in my vision, like, oh, they're from this valley in Norway. I grew up in Norway, and Norwegians, they will work themselves to the bone. They've got this hard work ethic. They will work from sunrise to sunset and not stop. And I had to go in and mediate between her ancestors. Like one of your descendants is not doing well because of your belief systems. That changed her ability to move her arm. And later I checked in with her and she's like, yeah, that was a game changer. So yeah, and there's other I've got some other ones with birth and death and there was this one woman in the shamanic class. Her and her husband, they were trying to get pregnant and nothing was working. I was like, you need to do an offering to your ancestors. I personally haven't done, at that point, I hadn't done it, but it was like, get your ancestors involved. Tell them what you're doing. Tell them that this is important. You need to get their support. And next time I saw her, she's like, hey, guess what? I'm pregnant. I'm going to leave it at that. I've got a number of stories, and it was like, wow. And that also spurred on this, like, we need to learn how to work with ancestors, because not just for advice, but also for the healing with death and dying, illnesses. You had a really good list there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. It's always great to hear like the tangible aspects of this work. And again, it really speaks to the spiritual influence that the ancestors can have, and the healing influence. And in some traditions, some indigenous cultures, they, if you need some sort of goodness, or if you have a problem, you go to the ancestors first, not just for advice, but direct spiritual support or healing, or you figure out, oh, if there's something that needs to be healed with your people, you do that work first. So, yeah. And, again, some other tangible things, like an ancestor who may have participated in a harmful family pattern, once healed, if you do that work, they can actually help the descendants in stopping that pattern and not repeating it over and over again. So, or ones that, have lived through, like I was saying, those social upheavals, they may have, insight into how to really preserve dignity, and adaptability to stay rooted, during those times of change that are outside of their control. So, there's just a lot, that we can tune into. And yes, we can tune into other spiritual guides as well. There's just happens to be like, in that sort of story of like the arm that was having a problem. Sometimes there's a little bit more direct influence that needs to be tended, because they are related to how our bodies are formed. So, yeah. So to that end, I do want to say that, ancestral belonging, it doesn't require that we have any sort of cultural conformity with our ancestors. It doesn't even mean that we have to be reconciled with our living relatives, or identify with everything our ancestors believed or practiced. You don't even need to admire your ancestors necessarily. And, even forgiving them for harms, can be an important part of, and a larger process, within the healing. So, that to all say that you don't need to be in touch with those who have harmed you or who continue that kind of harm. Um, uh, Estrangement, adoption. My father was adopted, so I have, familiarity with that pattern within, ancestry. Um, you know, all of the things that, even working with the transatlantic slave trade and the impact of that, and, forced migrations, even with the native people here in the U.S. Dealing with, a lot of families have a lot of secrets that were buried, all of those things. They can be in the ancestral field, and they don't prevent you from having relationship with the ones who have gone through a healing process. But in the ancestral work, you're not asked to be in relationship with those harms directly yourself. And Yeah, and so, the purpose of ancestral connection isn't to recreate ancestral life, or to become loyal to any systems that were harmful. Uh, and sometimes, rejecting our people is kind of necessary for our own survival. But I have seen that if our identity becomes organized around not being like our people, they sometimes still have this subtle influence through opposition on us. And I've seen the benefit to connecting beyond those troubled layers with ancestors, again, that are wise and well. And that can often heal our own aversion to our people. And, they may not share our unique worldview, because I think we all have our soul essence that, even when we connect with the wise and well ones, we're likely to be very different from them. But can they affirm and support our unique soul essence? And, when we find ancestors who do support and affirm us rather than block or reject us, it allows us to more freely express who we are in an unimpeded way. And again, that becomes like our blood, our bones sort of get on board with what this soul is trying to really express. And to me, each generation brings something beautiful and unique to the ones before them. And the ancestors realize that, they're excited to support the blossoming and the flourishing of this uniqueness that's emerging in the descendants. So the wise and well ones will be like, oh, you're doing the thing that we couldn't do, and now you're able to do it. Like, it's that kind of support that you're looking for. And I'll say this touches in on, working with the concept of the descendants, and Sandra Ingerman is super interested in this. I'll save that as a rabbit hole for another day, because that's a really powerful thing as well. But there is something to honor about ourselves as, bringing forward some level of new consciousness. And but when we can find those wise and well ancestors who are like, yeah, do this, then we get an extra kick. We get an extra sort of boost in manifesting those soul gifts. So yeah. Any thoughts or questions there before I go into a little bit of a discussion on ritual safety and discernment?
Annie, you've got your hand up.
Yeah.
So if you're working more on the connections with your past life ancestors, if they teach me things, and if I want to go into a deeper understanding of those abilities, is it pretty much the same process?
With the past life,
Yeah.
as well. Yeah. In my experience, the way that I approach past life healing, there is a similarity. Although I'm not usually working with other ancestral guides, I'm actually working with what I call more my culminating self or my higher self, which is informed by those ones. But that's a whole other dimension, which I'll talk a little bit more about those dimensions in a moment. But yeah, you're bringing in the non-blood ancestors and the wisdom that they have. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd appreciate hearing a little more about what you have to say with that. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
Summer, I've got a question. So when I was registering people, this question came up, which is really good. And and I'm paraphrasing here. I don't like my immediate family. What do I do? And I think like a lot of my friends are like, we're black sheeps. We kind of ran away from home and became punk rockers or something. Like we didn't, like the immediate family was not safe.
Yeah.
And the ancestors that I get a hold of are old, but the immediate,
Mhm.
how can you say something about that? About
Yeah. And, one thing that, people are like, I don't know if I ever had anybody that was well back there, there can be that sense of things. And what I would say is time can be a great healer too. Like a lot of times, even the ancestors way back when may not have been entirely well when they were living, but over time have gone through a healing process of their own. And that's what we're really tuning into with this work, is the ones that, yeah, maybe even when they were living, they didn't entirely get it, but they've gone through some sort of elevation of spirit. Yeah, and it's very understandable that a lot of us have things about the immediate family where we're like, I don't want to touch that. And I deeply understand that feeling. And sometimes those are the situations where, like, if you can find a resource further back that is healthy, it actually helps you to stabilize your boundaries with the unhealthiness too. So, yeah,
thank you.
yeah. So that's actually a great tie-in to ritual safety and discernment. So I'll kind of go into that next. I know there were some other questions, but we'll just to kind of make sure that I get through everything. I'll kind of continue on for now. And if you have questions that don't get answered, you can also email me, and I can answer those offline too. So I'll put my email in the chat towards the end. So in thinking about ritual safety, I basically was kind of thinking about six basic principles. And the first is kind of what I was saying in terms of boundaries. So again, we only connect with the wise and well and benevolent ancestors who support our sovereignty, support our flourishing. And even with those well ancestors, distance is a valid form of relationship. You don't need to be merged with or fully open to an ancestor in order to receive their support. So, honoring your boundaries, and the wise and well ones will actually enhance those boundaries with the not health in your lineages. So that can be very, very helpful. Um, uh, and that kind of comes to the second ritual safety item, which is support. So whenever we do ancestral work, we always begin with a trusted supportive power. So some of you already work with spirit allies. Some people have a particular like prayer or mantra that they use. Some people have a felt sense of protection, or boundary work that they do, um, that they feel is a source of support. So whatever it is, we always work from that place of support. And that's where, Annie, your question about like soul lineage, those allies can be incredibly important for the ancestral work, because they're like, we got your back, and you trust them and you know them. And so they can be a support for holding those boundaries with the, not so healthy ancestors. So, yeah. The third sort of point for ritual safety is really around consent and pacing. So just know that, I'll be guiding an experience, but when I'm working one-on-one with clients, I encourage pausing and, observing from a distance, doing modifications, even opening your eyes, or stopping, having that consent with what's happening is really important. And that kind of leads to the next point, which is discernment. And, not every image or sensation or thought needs to be interpreted literally, or taken into. So just having that paying attention to the quality of the interaction that's happening, and supportive ancestral contacts should usually support your groundedness, your sense of clarity, agency, and sometimes energies can show up that are a little bit more challenging. Like, for example, I had a client who her ancestors showed up as wolves, and again, they don't always have to be human, surprisingly. And that was an intense energy for her, but she stayed with it enough. It wasn't destabilizing completely. And so sometimes you do need to tend your own expectations rather than having something truly be unsafe. But that usually takes the kind of slowing down and really making sure that, okay, I have my support, I feel resourced, I'm not forcing something, I'm doing what my system needs in order to feel comfortable with this experience. So all of that to say, if something shows up and it feels like demanding in a way that you're not ready for, you just kind of like back off. This isn't an ancestor, but one of my big allies is spider. You'll see my spider drum back here. And I used to be afraid of spiders. And when that showed up as an ally, I was like, I'm going to put you on a shelf for, about 5 years before I'm ready to come back to you. So, you have that empowerment to kind of be like, just place you there for a little while. Or I've even had clients ask for a gentler version of the ancestor that showed up. And so that's possible too. And in their case, eventually they got so they were comfortable relating to the more intense ancestor, but it took them a while. They had to like ease into that. So yeah. The fifth thing about ritual safety is really about embodiment, like remaining connected to your body, to your sense of the physical environment in the ancestral work, because again, it is an embodied thing. It doesn't require going out of our body. We're not doing journey work. And often that sense of embodiment can really help with discernment. And everybody has different relationships to their sense of embodiment. So, just honoring that. But whatever way you feel like, okay, I'm in my place of safety, I'm in my place of resourceness. That's really important to be tuned into. And then the last piece is closure. We always intentionally thank the ancestors, thank the supportive powers, and kind of usually separate unless there's like a connection that feels appropriate to remain connected to. We usually are just like, okay, and now we're done. We're clearing the space, and we're returning to our everyday lives. So that sense of closure can also be an important part of the ritual. I'll also just mention that there are very different forms of perception when you're doing ancestral work. You might experience like images and words, but sometimes it's emotions, sometimes it's bodily sensations. Sometimes you'll just have like thoughts or memories. There's sometimes just like a subtle sense of presence. I've even had people just kind of fall asleep and nothing dramatic really happens. And that doesn't mean that the practice has failed. There is a sort of trusting of what is unfolding in your own unique way into the ancestral field. um, sometimes that nothingness can indicate that there are certain blockages, and then it's good to, inquire with a practitioner. Um, but sometimes it just means that's, what was needed for that day. Um, uh, my mom, when she first did this work, and she's a first grade teacher, she doesn't do spirit work, any of that sort of stuff. She smelled like a lot of like moss came really strongly. So just allow your experience to be what it is. Moni, is that your name? I have a question. Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
Can you go back and elaborate on what you said that not all ancestors have to be human? Were
Mhm.
they a human ancestor that's crossed over and chosen to be non-human in some way, or are they truly like a different lineage that we have access to? Thank you.
Yeah. So, um, uh, I think Jan and I talked about, like, with the four-part series, people will have access to my recording on ancestral hybridity. So I go into a lot about that in the other session that I did. But the short of it is there's many different ways that hybridity can happen. But often you'll find, like, my sense of it is, like, when I meet native people and they're like, we're the wolf clan, I don't take it as like we're really close to the wolf. I also take it as we are descendants from this. And there's like a lot of mysterious mystical ways that can happen. I actually have a practice of spirit marriage with a land guardian, and have had hybrid offspring from that union. And not in physical human form, they're in spirit form, but there are traditions and stories of those kinds of incarnational experiences happening in the human realm as well. So there's a lot to unpack with that. So I won't go too much into it, but there is a recording of an entire workshop that I did about that, because that's one of my things that I love diving into. Yeah. Good. So any questions about ritual safety with this work? Okay. And you don't have to be an expert and remember all of this when we go to do our practice. But it's just nice to have that in the background as you think about doing ancestral work. Um, so I want to place ancestral work a little bit more into this larger framework that I call three spheres. And this is kind of what I'll be diving into more in the four-part series. Um, but it's also, the reason I'm working in the three spheres is that it's a foundation for creating a strong base for adaptation and creativity during times of change. And the way that I think about this is three fields of relationship that I see really shaping our embodied lives. And the first is what we've been talking about, the ancestral field, that which we inherit through our DNA, through the ancestors of blood. And then we also have what I call the soul stream. So Annie was talking about ancestors of spirit. Those are, to me, it's been part of my past life healing experience. It's unique to my spirit outside of my ancestors. And then there's also what I call like the earth body. It's like the part of us that's woven into and related to the earth in this particular time and place that we're incarnated. And my sense is that we're, influenced by what we inherit by our people, what we uniquely have in our souls and is seeking expression, and the lands and living communities that our lives take root in. And I started to tune into these three spheres during my own healing process. which again included a lot of past life healing and ancestral healing, but simultaneously tending my deep connection to place and to the spirits of place. And it's unsurprising that later, after my own explorations, I started to learn that other traditions have this concept. So Daniel 4, my teacher of ancestral work, studied with Serengal Odigan, who's a Buryat Mongol shaman. And they talk about the soul having 3 parts, which is very similar to these parts. You can also kind of track it to some of the 3 cauldrons in the Celtic tradition, or even in the Buddhist tradition, Dharmakaya, Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya. There's like all of these sorts of 3nesses of what the soul is. And I'm not saying that that's the only way to look at the structure of the soul. In Norse shamanism, they actually talk about 9 aspects of the soul. But what's interesting to me is that it asks for us to look at ourselves not as one whole discrete being, but almost as like a nexus point or an organizing consciousness of different aspects of fields of consciousness that include like our embodied presence. It includes what we've inherited from the ancestors. That includes our own unique spirit. And in my experience, these 3 spheres give us a foundation to attune to the structure of consciousness. And when they're in greater harmony, we often become more creative, more adaptive, more responsive during times of change. We're not as like freaked out by it. And so that's really what the 4-part series is going to be focused on, tending the ancestral field to help bring those spheres into greater alignment. And so again, it's the ancestral field, what we've inherited. And when we tend that sphere, there's usually greater internal backing and support, less pressure to repeat inherited patterns that don't really express or serve our soul purpose. We get access to lineage strengths, and have a stronger sense that we're kind of accompanied in our humanness. So it makes sense to tend the ancestral field as a base. And then what I call our soul stream, our unique essence, our particular gifts and calling, our temperament, our creative intelligence. And I, again, think that our uniqueness emerges more freely when we have relationships with the ancestors and with the earth that are harmonized and bless that uniqueness. And in my case, unresolved ancestral content really prohibited me from expressing my soul gifts, because that was not safe. That was not okay. We shut that down. We blocked that out. And so tending that field allowed me to kind of not just tune into my gifts, but also express them in ways that weren't blocked. And that doesn't mean that I am exactly like my ancestors. I definitely, they're like, you're doing something that we didn't quite get to do. But it means I have support from them to do that unique thing. And I often see this with clients that I work with, that their soul gifts come through and mature more when the ancestors are tended. And then what I talk about, the earth body, the part of us that belongs to place, our relationship to land, waters, community, our food systems, the more than human beings, all of that. And our ancestors have a lot of wisdom for about, growing and preparing food, tending waters, listening to the seasonal cycles, all of that sort of stuff, how to be in reciprocal relationship to the other than human. But even when, exact ancestral practices aren't recreated, there can be almost like a information about how to develop our own new culture based on some of these principles and ways that our people connected to place. And talking about the harms within our lineages, we may need to address some things in the ancestral field that disconnects us from place. Migration. A lot of times, the biggest break that I see in lineages is around grief of having to leave what they consider to be home. We also have all of the imprints of colonization, whether you were a colonizer or you were colonized, forced removal from your lands, loss of traditional knowledge, or even shame around that, can prevent people from having really strong connections to the current place that they're living in. So ancestral tending can start to allow us to come into deeper relationship with place, by addressing some of those blockages and harms too. So just, the soul stream carries what's uniquely us. The ancestral field influences whether that uniqueness is supported or constrained by tradition and inheritance. And then the earth body gives us a place to root and to relate and to have those gifts become real and woven into the web of life. And that's kind of the larger intention for my ancestral work. So that was a lot of information. I think there were quite a few things in the chat. Is there anything burning that seems really important to talk about before we go into experiential practice? I want to give us a lot of time for that. So, yeah.
Summer, there's one question here. There's some brilliant questions here, and we could spend a lot of time on this. But Stephanie, you've got a question about if we want to address, this is back to, healing family rifts or family, if we want to address issues in our current family and heal the patterns that impact us or our family now, I'm thinking about my mother's childhood experiences, is that work we can do for another rather than my own self? Stephanie, did I get that? Is there anything you want to add there?
Yeah, what I will just say is we cannot force healing on anyone else, unfortunately. We do go through a process in the ancestral lineage healing method that allows the healed energy to rain down on the living. And I often say some of them have umbrellas. They're like, I'm not receiving any of that. And some of them are like, ooh, I'm dancing in the rain. I want more of that. I want more of that. And, I saw in my own lineage healing work, it had some pretty profound impacts on my father. He was ready to receive that on a particular level, but I couldn't do it for him on behalf of him. It just had to be something that, his soul was ready to receive in a way. It's one of the things that I think about in terms of preparing people for death and dying and then tending to those who have just crossed over, because there's a lot of potential for healing to happen that couldn't necessarily happen while they're living, because they weren't for some reason ready for that. So yeah, much kindness when those situations are there. But what I will say is that the ancestors can often be really good support, again, with those boundaries. Like if there's, I've seen a lot of clients have better relationships with their families because they've been able to have really strong boundaries. So, yeah.
And then I think we've got a fairly quick question here from Mary. I'm wondering if we can ask questions about their history when embodied after exploring how healed they are. Can you get information from your ancestors about how they lived?
Yeah. So when you have a connection with a well ancestor that feels really good and nourishing and strong, it's lovely just to drop in with them, on a regular basis and be like, tell me about you. Like they love that kind of. So you can just kind of go in and learn from them as you would, a regular spirit guide. So yeah, beautiful. So I want to get us to experiential practice so that we have some time to actually kind of land some of this in your own um, uh, bodies and experience. So, at the beginning of the workshop, for those of you who were trickling in early, I asked some questions about, thinking about change that you're navigating and some of the human qualities that are needed to support that change. And in the practice that I'll be guiding, you'll have the opportunity to connect with a wise and well ancestor who carries a quality or a skill or some sort of blessing for you or perspective that may support you and resource you during times of change. So that's kind of the goal of this practice that I'll guide you through. And again, you don't need to know who the ancestor is. Their identity might become clearer over time. But the quality of the relationship matters more than receiving specifics on their name and when they lived and detailed stories about them. So I'll be guiding a practice, but the instructions will be given as invitations. And the main guidance is for you to remain connected to your supportive powers that feel safe and resourcing to you throughout the experience. And yeah. So let's maybe just take a quick pause. Sometimes people like to rearrange how they're sitting to kind of drop into a different experiential mode. If you want to go off camera, you can do that. I'm going to have some water. Yeah, just do whatever it is that feels supportive for you to be able to drop into a deeper experience. And again, at the beginning, I did an invocation of the world tree and the guardians, the threshold keepers, and just, reactivating that support and that sense that we're held in a personal and collective field of integrity and support in this time. And just allow yourself to settle into your body. Allow yourself to feel your connection to the earth. Letting all of the information sort of wash over you and just kind of settle into your groundedness, your centeredness. Maybe really pay attention to the support of the chair, the floor. Maybe even taking some deep breaths to settle your system. And I'll invite you to first call on a trusted supportive power, a spiritual ally. Can even be a mantra or prayer, just some sort of source of goodness that resource you. Just take a moment to really attune to that. If you have a sense of that, just asking for your space to be cleared, anything that needs to be moved or shifted, so that you're oriented in a good way for this experience. Just allow that supportive power to help you with that attunement. And also ask for your boundaries to be amplified and real sense of protection, resourceness for your personal sovereignty, that which makes you uniquely you. And from this cleared and protected space, really relying on your supportive power to help guide you to connect with a wise and well ancestor. And particularly someone who has wisdom about how to remain deeply rooted and nourished and resourced and adaptive during times of change. And just give yourself a moment for that connection to reveal itself. Just allow, however, that ancestral presence is perceived in this moment, to just be right for you. You can even ask yourself, does whatever shows up feel safe to be in relationship with? They feel like they can support your own sovereignty, flourishing. You can have some discernment about what arrives. You can even request a different ancestor. It's allowing your supportive power to help make sure you're resourced. If someone's arrived, that feels good to you, you can invite the ancestor to share a quality that they carry that could support you during times of change. Just allow them to share a bit about who they are, what strengths and wisdoms they carry. And just allow yourself to receive gently and maybe even in an embodied way a sense of those qualities, maybe even a sense of your resonance with those qualities. Sometimes the ancestors want to give a direct blessing to you. Sometimes they want to just show you a skill or a practice. Just give you some time to kind of explore that connection and what they want to offer. You might inquire about how you might recognize or continue the relationship with this ancestor. And without any pressure to do so, but sometimes there's certain activities or ways to honor them, deepen the relationship. Just allow another moment of exchange with this one, knowing that you can come back on your own. They're there to be able to connect with. Maybe offer some thanks for them showing up today. And then just ask your supportive power to help you close the connection, really tending your space, clearing it if it needs to, reinforcing those boundaries of protection, just helping support your integration of what you received. When you're ready, you can return your attention to your breath and your body, the room you're in. You'll be doing some small physical movements, opening your eyes and reorienting. And I'll just give you a few minutes. You know, sometimes people like to journal about their experience. Just kind of seeing how you want to record your experience. Yeah, so probably have just about like 4 minutes or so. If anybody wants to share anything from their experience, maybe invite 2 or 3 brief reflections. And again, you don't need to disclose any family secrets on this recorded call or anything like that. But if there's anything that you want to share, the space is welcome and open for you.
Well, I'll jump in. I am the first person in a very long time that has not had lived in a time of warfare. My ancestors, there was continuous warfare, and they're looking at me, going, "How do you live in a peaceful time?"
Mm. Yeah. Thanks, Jan. Jay, I saw your hand up. Is there something you want to offer?
Yeah, I just wanted to share that in my work, I'm a psilocybin facilitator. So much of the work that people go into is to deal with their ancestors and unhealed trauma because we're told to move on from it, to move, and become assimilated when we move to this country, to let go of all that and let go of our ancestors. And many people don't even have a concept of what their ancestors are like or who they were. We're very, very disconnected from that. So, really powerful work with this. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Jay. Thank you for your work. Yeah, Sam.
I'm not entirely sure what it was really. Kind of a bit of a first time thing for me, but it wasn't it wasn't a kind of sense of cold. It was kind of a sense of anti-heat and absence of heat, and not in an oppressive way. It was kind of acknowledging the heat that I have in me as a human, and that eventually it will become part of the not heat. So a kind of gratitude that I have for that now, and an acknowledgement for how that is not always going to remain that way, and being okay with it.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I often have clients that their people are very connected with the void. And sometimes, when they go into an ancestral connection, it's just darkness and blackness. They're like, what is that? And I'm like, that's a very valid ancestral experience. And actually, that deep yin is a foundational building block for creative life force. So yeah. Things can show up in unexpected ways. Let's just say that. Carol, yeah. Is there something
Hi.
you want to share?
So I ended up, I wanted to have more joy in my life. So I ended up meeting an ancestor who was from my mother's father's line. That was the Moberlys. They came to the United States probably late 1600s, but this woman was pre coming to the United States. This line, I don't know if they ever tied in with royalty, but I think they had, a little bit better funds, back then in their family life. So this woman was stern, she was proper. And I asked her about joy, and I asked her, "Do you have joy?" And she's like, "Yes." And I said, "How do you express it?" And she ended up saying she feels it in her heart. It's like, saying beauty and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, that's exactly what I do. And I have the stern and the proper too kind of thing. And I'm like going, oh my God. So I started to realize that my question was more of, I would like to express more joy in my life, have more interaction from the outside world and my world, my physical, spiritual world. And what I was gifted with was seeing what I did pick up from my family line of how to do joy, which I want something different. I need to do it again with a little bit different question of like, finding an ancestor that actually expressed joy in their lives and see what that
Mm-hmm.
looks like a little bit and try to incorporate that. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating because, you're seeing, oh, there's that pattern.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I have that. But then
Yeah.
you're also tuning into that unique soul gift of like you have an inquiry of how to shift from that pattern too. And a lot of times the ancestors are like, thank you, we've been waiting for someone to solve this.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Amita, yes.
So that was interesting. There are two names that have stuck with me my whole life. Like if I'm going to name something, they're the first names I'm going to go to. And as an adult, I've stopped using those two names because I just feel like they're just whatever's in my head. Well, I had two ancestors show up and they were those names. And I'm like, am I making this up? And they're like, no, we're why you're connected to those. And I'm like, okay. And one of them is Penelope. The message she had for me was that she was the seed that allowed me to be who I am. And I don't know of a Penelope in my ancestral line, but that doesn't mean there isn't one, of course. And then George is the other. And George kept showing me like farmers' fields, and he had like a stalk of wheat in his mouth, and he's like in a rocking chair, you know. And I said, "What do you have for me, George?" And he said, "The land is honest, man is not." And I was like, huh, that's interesting, especially with, the work that I do. So that was very, very interesting.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, there's some great wisdom in all of that. Yeah, thank you. Gloria, yeah.
The two qualities that came through for me were the first one, I think the word I'm looking for might be sovereignty. And the second one was complete flow, or like all is easeful. So
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. And, when you can sense that you have that support for those qualities, that's like coming in. Again, I have deep, profound respect for all the different spirit guides, but there's something about when it comes through like the blood and the bone lineage, it's like, oh yeah, I have that in my physical body, that flow, that yeah. Donna, last share, because we do have to start to wrap up. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll make it really quick. I don't know if we have a theme going, but I know Carol and Yasmin and well, for me, it was a little Polish boy, which I was surprised that I got a little kid in traditional Polish dress of probably the 1800s. And he said, I am here to bring you joy. And he was so full of joy and a little mischief. And it was just so pleasant.
You muted somehow.
Oh.
You're not on mute, but for some reason we can't hear you.
Shoot.
I can hear just fine.
I can hear her.
Okay.
I can hear.
Keep going, Donna.
That's me.
It was wonderful because I know it would have been from my paternal line, which is a lot of bad guys. So it was so wonderful to meet this dear little boy he's here to bring me joy. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, that was my internet blipping. Thank you. I like this. Joy as a resource for staying rooted and adaptive during change. I like that. That's good. I like that theme. Good. Well, we just have a couple more minutes. So I just, thank you all for being on this experimental journey with me. And we can see we just opened a little doorway to what ancestral support looks like. And the 4-part series will have more time to explore what may be obstructing the flow of that support, strengthen the relationships with a particular lineage, and start to bring that ancestral soul stream and earth body into greater harmony. So part one is going to be really about how the ancestral field affects the soul stream and the embodiment of these gifts. And then part two will be really working similar to what we were doing about working with the ancestors as allies in times of change, and deepening that access to their resilience. And then part three will be about deepening our attunement with the ancestors to place. And then the part four will be kind of harmonizing and bringing that all in together. So that starts Wednesday, August 26th, 5 to 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. And we'll go every Wednesday for 4 weeks. Yeah. So again, just thanking all of you for being here, thanking the supportive powers, the wise and well ancestors, the guardians of the directions, the threshold keepers, all those who came in to support the integrity of the sacred space that we created today. And we release all of those who came to support that to their best time, place, and dimension, again, with our gratitude and our receptivity to the continued blessings and the rippling out of this time together in a good way. So thank you all. And yeah, so we're right at 11:30, but if there are other questions, I'm happy to stay on a little bit and see. Yeah.
I have kind of a personal question, or I don't know if it's really personal, but when you say the ancestors helped you express your soul gift, did you, I don't know, it's kind of like, there's part of me is like, I don't even know, am I expressing my soul gift or not? Like, were you aware beforehand that you were blocked, and how did that shift? Or
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a pretty profound sort of opening that I had. I was living in India and I had this kind of like big psychic opening, and I was like, I don't know what that is, but it feels very much like, a core sort of soul truth that needs to be figured out how to be expressed. And I did a lot of like past life healing. And then at a certain point, I was like, this just isn't landing. Like I literally didn't feel like all of that could just come in. And I was at Tree Frog Farm studying shamanic flower essences, and then I was studying with some herbalists, and they did a workshop on ancestral healing. And I was like, oh, I'll just take this to see what this is. And then I was like, whoa, okay, that's a thing. And when I started doing the ancestral tending, all of a sudden I started to recognize the things in my field that were like, we got to shut that down. We can't do that. We were burned for doing that. Like all of those things that they were like, this is not safe or okay. And when I went through the process of healing that, all of a sudden I had space for me to like all those gifts actually had more room to unfold. And they gave me more information about some of the gifts, because some of them did come from certain lineages. And like I had a lineage that the women would marry the land or the sacred waters, and those kinds of spirit relationships were a deep practice, and they were like, oh, we can tell you about that. I have another lineage that they're kind of precursors to the scythe Norse animism, and they're like, oh, we can tell you about the world tree and the Norns. So they deepen some of my practices too. Yeah.
all right, thank you.
And then on the theme of ancestral lineage healing, September 19th, Ryan Foxwood. It was really interesting. I was putting this together with Summer, and then I get a text from Orion saying, hey, can I do a workshop? It's like, how about ancestry? Summer, you've done that ritual before, the River of Blood. Can you say something about that? And how does that tie in with what you're doing? or how does it
Yeah. Oh my
culminate into
gosh.
doing?
I had an amazing experience with Orion's River of Blood work. Not necessarily what he was trying to guide us. Um, I just remember at one point, we were gently going across the river Styx, and my guides like dumped me out of the boat and straight into the water. Which I don't highly recommend for everyone, but it was an initiation into the larger ancestral field, and actually is sort of astrologically indicated for me as well. So for me, it was appropriate. I wouldn't recommend it for everybody, but it was a powerful initiation into the ancestral work. So I'll just say that.
Okay, great. And then next month we've got Amita with sacred geography and intuitive geomancy. So if you, Amita, if you can be the last person, if you could just say something about next month's workshop, that'd be great. But Stephanie, you've got a question, and then we'll get back to Amita.
Absolutely.
You're muted. There we go.
Yeah, thank you.